Hey folks, welcome back. This is another Unity Playground tutorial. In this one, we're going to create a rocket jump where when the character jumps in the air, there is an explosion. And the idea with this is that this character might have an explosive jump that destroys objects within our scene and helps unlock new areas and new territories. So let's jump in and see how that works. So I've started by setting a few things up. They're really quick and easy to get caught up. They're from other tutorials, but I'll tell you really quickly what I've done. So I right-clicked and I created a new 2D tile map. And then I opened a tile palette where I had imported a tile set from Kenney.nl, where I get a lot of my different assets for doing these tutorials. Go ahead and check them out at Kenney.nl. And I've chosen to use this pixel platformer setup, and I've just painted a few tiles onto this tile map. I've labeled it as ground, and I've added a player. This player is a little bit of an animation. It also came from Kenney.nl. It's got a rigid body that's got gravity. It's got the ability to move using WASD left and right, and it's got a jump on it. The jump is set to use my W key and jump up 5, and the ground tag is on, which means I can only jump whenever I hit the ground. I've also got a polygon collider on this as well. Of late, I've actually been using the capsule collider 2D, which I find is a lot better. So if I wanted to, I could go ahead and remove my polygon collider and go ahead and use that capsule collider. Now I'm just doing that here on this one rather than using the prefab. I'm just going to go ahead and make those changes right here on this instance of the prefab. 0, let's turn that down a little bit. There we go. If you're having any trouble where your character is getting caught up on tiles, the capsule collider tends to roll over tiles much better and much more easily. Okay, so what are we going to do here? Well, when this character jumps, I am going to create an animation of an explosion. So I'm not actually going to set that in the jump animation. I'm going to add a new component here, and it's going to be condition key press, and I'm just going to set it to be the same key. So rather than using the space, which I currently have as shoot, I'm going to set this to be my W key. So when I press W, something is going to happen. And that something is I am going to create an object. But right now, I don't have the object that I want to create. So let's go ahead and generate that. So there are a number of prefabs that come with Unity Playground. If I scroll down to prefabs, I can look at these different particles: confetti, explosion, flame, impact, and magic sparks. None of these are quite right for what I want to use. So I'm going to use something else, which is smoke. And I can just do a search for that. And there is this texture that's been imported, and it's been turned into an animation. And I'm going to make a quick modification so that it works properly for what I want to do. So I'm actually going to try and copy and place it into my own folder. Oops. Assets, there we go. I'm going to try and place it right here. And the idea with this is I can now make some modifications to it to get it to work the way that I want it to. So if I go into the sprite editor is on my other monitor. Let me just pull it over. So normally when you go and slice, you are getting a, looks like I might have already changed this one in preparation. Normally when you're doing this slice, I usually do by cell count. You're doing 3 by 3, and then normally the keep empty rex is empty, which means that that rectangle in the lower right hand corner usually gets deleted. In this instance, am going to check the box for keep empty rex and slice so that we keep the empty frame here. And the reason for that is when I go ahead and apply and close, when I drag this into the scene, it's prompting me to create an animation, and I'm going to call this smoke animation, save. And when I press play, this animation will play. And because the last frame is empty, it's going to have one frame of empty before it loops. So if I select my smoke animation and I turn off loop time, what will now happen is it will go through the full animation and end on an empty frame. If I do not keep empty recs and I just go ahead and create an animation from this, it will actually stop on that 8th frame, which has a little bit of particle left. So by doing this, I now have an animation that looks like it completely disappears. So I'm going to go ahead and drag Smoke 0 into my folder, which is going to turn it into a prefab. I can then delete the one from the scene. And this means on my blue player, on condition key press, I can drag my smoke into the create object. And I'm going to set this relative to this object. And now every time I jump, it will create an animation of smoke. There we go. Oh, my character is rolling. Now that I've made it a capsule, let's go ahead and put a constraint of freezing my rotation so that he doesn't roll over. Okay, there we go. I've got my nice animation, but the animation is showing up in front of my character. So I'm going to look at my character, I'm going to look at the sprite renderer, and I'm going to look at the visibility options. And right now, everything's being placed on layer 0. So if I want my character to be in the foreground of something that I'm spawning, I'm going to go ahead and set that order to layer 1 to make sure it's in front of other things. Playtest that. There we go. So now every time that he's jumping, there's smoke in the background. Now, one tricky thing here is you'll see over here, every time I jump, it's creating a instance of this smoke animation. That instance is still there in the background. It's not going away. So I'm not going to go into the aspects of how to delete these. It gets a little bit tricky. Playground is a little bit limited in the code that we're given to make this go away. But best practices would be to have these cleaned up, to essentially treat these as garbage and collect them and destroy them at the end of the level or every certain number of frames. But given that Unity Playground is really just an introduction to coding, there isn't an easy way to get rid of those. And I'm just going to leave them in the background of the scene. So pointing them out, that is actually problematic if you end up building a really large game with Unity Playground. You're going to want to figure out a way to grab those and delete them. Okay, so we have our explosion working, but what I'm really interested in doing is setting up a element that I can destroy with my rocket jump or my explosion. So I'm going to go into Unity Technologies, I'm going to go into Playground, I'm going to look at my images, and there's some blocks in here, and I'm just going to grab one of these blocks. Let's take this wooden one, because that would be more likely to be destroyed in the explosion. And once I have that in here, I'm going to add a component, and I'm going to set it to be a box collider 2D. And I'm going to make sure it's not a trigger. And that's going to mean when I try and bump into it, it's going to stop me. Perfect. Now, one of the things that I've also run into is in order to destroy this block, I believe it also needs to be a rigid body 2D. And this means that it will have gravity. It will actually be able to be pushed. So you might also want to check that it's got enough mass. So when I try and push it, that doesn't have enough mass. If I turn this up to 10, it still moves too much for me. I'm going to make sure that there's some friction on that object. And ideally, that might be enough. But if you really want it to be super solid, you can always just crank this mass up to something where the character will never be able to move it. There we go. Okay. So the idea here is every time I jump, there's an animation, and I want to associate that animation with the ability to destroy objects. So to do that, I'm going to go to the prefab that I created of the smoke animation, and I'm going to go inside of this, and I'm going to add a new component, which will be a circle collider. And anytime I spawn any of these, any instance of this prefab, it will get the circle collider. And I could make this a little bit bigger than the explosion to make sure that it's hitting something. I also definitely want to say that this is a trigger because it's going to overlap and then destroy. And then I'm going to add component to this of condition area. Now, this is the really important thing. We are going to need to filter by tag, and we're going to need to create a new tag of things that are explodable. But let's actually look at what happens when we don't do that and see the problems that it causes. So when something overlaps my circle collider, I am going to destroy that object, and I'm going to destroy the other object. Okay, let's back out of our prefab, which will mean I need to save this. And now I should be able to press play. And when I jump into the air, I destroy myself because I'm not filtering by tag. And that's why we really need to filter by tag. So this should be tagged as player. If it's not already, now it's tagged as player. And then I'm going to create a new tag for this. So the easiest way that I've found for creating these new tags is when you're actually editing your thing that is destroying. You scroll down, filter by tag, turn that on, tag the check for. Let's add a new tag. So I want to hit plus to add a new tag. You can actually see I've already done this. I've added something called box, which will be my explosion. So I could also tag something as explodable. That's probably not the right spelling. Explodable, explodable. Not too big on explosions. Okay, there we go. Explodable, that's fine for me right now. I go back in here and make sure that we're looking for things that are tagged as explodable. I save my prefab, and then I can select my wooden block and set it to be explodable. Nothing else in the scene right now is explodable. I'm going to go ahead and press play. Oops, wrong key. So the jump key now explodes it. I can go ahead and make a duplicate of this. These should both be explodable. I could also add other objects. For instance, one of the things that I can also do is let's duplicate it. Let's move it up here. And then I could just change the sprite that is currently being used for this. That one is not the right size, but let's just go ahead and use that. Oh, that's going to be interesting. It's the wrong size, so it's actually going to fall down. Let's actually change it to another block. There we go. So all of these objects should be explodable because they were tagged. The first one was tagged and then I copied it. So there we go. Now the important thing to understand is that there are all of these instances here of this explosion, and they're staying where they are, so they don't move with the player. But if you ever have a block that is falling from the sky, it will potentially be destroyed. Let's actually look at that really quickly. If I take this block and duplicate it and move it really high in the sky, it's it's tagged as block. It has a rigid body with gravity, so it's going to fall. So if I jump right at the beginning and move out of the way, when it falls and hits that invisible animation, it will now be destroyed. But as long as you're understanding how this is working, this should, there was the problem right there. That block fell over into my explosion, and they're both destroyed. So this definitely works, but it has some drawbacks. So there we go. We can at least understand how that works. And hopefully in the future, I can offer you some additional coding to add into your game in order to allow you to delete that garbage and clean it up after the fact. But that is very tricky to do in Unity Playground. So hopefully this helps you with rocket jumps or exploding jumps in order to unlock other parts of the map. Let me know if you run into any problems or questions with the tutorial in the comments, and I'll see if I can get you some answers. Good luck building your games.